Hello everyone, I am the Man Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Commander Masters Precons, Narci, Fable Singer. This video is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. To see other cool folks who support my content, check out the description below. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Narci is a 3/3 human bard with lifelink for 1 generic, 1 white, 1 black, and 1 green. She has 2 triggered abilities. The first one happens whenever you sacrifice an enchantment, drawing you a card. Her second ability triggers whenever the final ability of a saga resolves. When it does, you gain X life and your opponents lose X life, where X is the saga's mana value. This is incredibly strong because it has the potential of interacting with her first trigger. Keep in mind that when sagas reach their final chapter, they're sacrificed as a state-based action. This allows your sagas to replace themselves. However, the moment I saw this legendary creature, I had something a bit spicier in mind. What if we didn't sacrifice those sagas? That way we can keep them and use other enchantment synergies with this commander. That is what I thought of first. Which sagas am I referring to? Sagas that transform into enchantment creatures. But we'll get to that in a moment, as well as why. First, let's see the only non-transforming sagas in the deck: Phyrexian Scriptures and War of the Last Alliance. These are too good not to include. The first one will wipe the board of non-artifact creatures while also making one of your creatures an artifact first. Then it exiles all of your opponent's graveyards. An amazing saga overall. The next one has us tutor for a legendary creature twice. There are a handful of good legends in the deck, so this is a great way to tutor for them. Then the final ability helps us aggro out, especially since the rest of our sagas are double-faced. Azusa's Many Journeys, Boseiju Reaches Skyward, Jugan Defends the Temple, and the Restoration of Eiganjo provides some form of mana acceleration, whether by letting you play an additional land, creating a mana dork, seeking a land, etc. They also have an additional ability that is useful, where they're gaining life, pumping a creature, recovering a cheap card, etc. However, as previously mentioned, what I cared about most was these sagas transforming. That ability will still trigger Narci, so you'll drain the table for their mana values. However, you now have enchantment creatures entering the battlefield, which will trigger other effects in the deck. You're also not losing a card since a normal saga gets sacrificed after its final ability resolves, but not these. So now we have attackers, chump blockers, sacrifice fodder, etc. The best of these is Boseiju and Jugan, since Boseiju has the potential of being a huge creature, and Jugan is an amazing mana sink. This will help you pump a creature up significantly upon entering the battlefield. Not only that, but Jugan also has the potential of being a 7/7 flyer with trample. So good. Speaking of pumping up creatures, we have Befriending the Moths, Life of Toshiro Umezawa, Michiko's Reign of Truth, and Tales of Master Seshiro. These all provide a temporary boost, with Seshiro providing a +1/+1 counter. Umezawa's saga does provide options though, allowing you to kill a 1 toughness creature or gain 2 life. However, as previously mentioned, what I cared most about these sagas is transforming them. Of these, Michiko will more than likely be the one to hit the hardest, with Seshiro coming in second. Toshiro becomes a mana dork, but only for instants and sorceries, of which the deck has a handful, so it's not a useless ability here. The important thing is getting enchantments twice out of these sagas. Next up is the Fall of Lord Konda and the Long Reach of Night. These provide some form of interaction, with the white one having players regain control of their permanents. So while these are here mostly for transforming, they're still definitely useful. That being said, let's see what lies behind the face. Lord Konda is a defender that draws us a card when it dies, so it's still useful, especially if we have any sacrifice outlets in play. The Animus has the potential of being a huge beater depending on the situation. In a multiplayer game of Commander, board wipes are quite common. Granted, the deck is still running non-synergistic interaction like Assassin's Trophy, Beast Within, Generous Gift, and Vindicate. Not every card in the deck has to be synergistic. While you could also add removal and interaction in the form of enchantments, since they do exist, like Oblivion Ring, etc., plus other sagas with interaction, sometimes you just need to keep mana up to cast one of these catch-all instants, or sorcery in the case of Vindicate. In any case, the last of these double-faced sagas are Era of Enlightenment and Tribute to Horobi. These aren't anything to write home about, but we can't have a rightward-skewed mana curve just because we have access to green. We do need cheap cards to help trigger our effects, so these are good enough for what it is. These are definitely flex slots though, for when it comes time to update the deck. When they transform, they're not so bad. The white one is a 2/2 with first strike, which is great if it gets pumped up. The black one is a 3/3 flyer with haste, so that's already good. Plus you gain control of all those rats you gave while it was a saga. If that weren't enough, when it attacks, you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, you draw a card. So if you were to sacrifice any of these enchantment creatures, you will also draw a card off of Narci. See? Synergy. So even though Horobi isn't that good as a saga, it's great when it transforms. The final transforming saga is Sheoldred. This time it's the other way around. Sheoldred isn't a saga that transforms into a creature, but a creature that transforms into a saga. She's amazing as a creature first though. She's a 4/5 with menace that forces opponents to sacrifice a non-token creature or planeswalker. Then you can transform her by just paying 5 mana. It is at sorcery speed though, and an opponent has to have 8 or more cards in their graveyard. That's fine because this counts instants, sorceries, fetch lands, creatures, etc. So someone is bound to have this requirement early enough. In any case, when she transforms into the True Scriptures, we can destroy a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. We then have them discard 3 cards and mill 3. Then, best of all, we steal all creatures from graveyards and then the saga is exiled and returns transformed back into Sheoldred. So we not only have a saga that doesn't go away after its final chapter, but one with a built-in way of transforming back and forth. Plus, she's a legendary creature, so we can tutor her with War of the Last Alliance. Alright, now that we saw the sagas, let's see why I went with this route instead of just chalking the deck full of the best sagas. Well, as I already mentioned, we don't lose any cards with these transforming sagas. Plus, we get more synergies. But, best of all, it's because if we blink those enchantment creatures, they return from exile into their front face side, giving us access to that saga again, just like with Sheoldred. Thus, the deck is running blink effects like Conjurer's Closet and Teleportation Circle. At the beginning of our end step, we can blink one of these enchantment creatures in order to have them return as a saga again. The deck doesn't have many creatures with ETB effects, but we want a revolving door between the faces of those sagas. Eldrazi Displacer and Emil the Blessed do it better, since we can blink them at will and at instant speed. They do require mana, but if we had enough, then we can blink multiple saga creatures. Plus, we can tutor for Emil with War of the Last Alliance. The Displacer requires 1 colorless mana to activate, but the deck has enough colorless mana sources for that. Golden Argosy has the potential of exiling as many saga creatures as we use to crew it. We do have to attack with it, which can be a risk of it dying in combat. However, it exiles them all on attack and not combat damage, so even if it bites the dust, it gets the job done. Eerie Interlude, Semester's End, and Ghostway can also blink a large amount of creatures. The first 2 is whichever ones we want, while the last one exiles them all. The best thing about it is that they're delay blinked, so we can also use these as defensive effects in response to a board wipe, so keep that in mind. However, we can also just keep them as enchantment creatures if we need blockers or want to remain offensive. Calyx Guided by Fate rewards us when we attack with enchantment creatures as is himself an enchantment creature, a legendary one at that for War of the Last Alliance. In any case, whenever another enchantment enters the battlefield, we can put a +1/+1 counter on our creature. Notice that this is an ETB trigger, so when those sagas get exiled and then returned as creatures, they're once again entering the battlefield. This will trigger Calyx. If that wasn't all, whenever an enchantment creature deals combat damage to an opponent, we can create a token copy of a non-legendary enchantment we control. It does only trigger once, but that's okay. This allows us to copy our best enchantments, whether they're sagas, creatures, or others. Unfortunately, even though March of the Machine now allows for tokens to transform, the sagas are exiled and then return transformed. So once the token is exiled, it ceases to exist, and it won't return transformed. Keep that in mind. Now that we've seen the usual spice you know me for, what's next? This strategy seems a bit slow considering we'd have to wait 3 turns to transform our sagas. Well, how about we speed up that process via proliferation? Yes, you can proliferate lore counters. Doing so will trigger the next chapter. Yes, this is busted. Contagion Clasp, Contagion Engine, Karn's Bastion, and Vraska's Betrayal Sting can essentially be only used once since they require tapping, and you can only use Vraska once due to being a planeswalker. But apart from Vraska, you can activate these at instant speed. As a bonus, the Contagion artifacts also have the potential of putting -1/-1 counters that can be proliferated. Another similar effect is found on Sasuke the Living Lord. All you have to do is tap her, and then you can put a lore counter on each saga you control. The only drawback is that this is limited to sorcery speed. However, she has a death trigger that can either recover a saga or enchantment, or bounce a saga or enchantment creature. Grateful Apparition and Sword of Truth and Justice also proliferate, but only upon dealing combat damage. Keep in mind what you equip the sword to, since it gives protection from white. That means that you won't be able to target the creature with any of your own beneficial effects. That being said, its damage trigger is absolutely busted in the deck and the protection is relevant. Evolution Sage has the potential of proliferating multiple times with 0 effort. The deck is running all 9 fetch lands, so playing one and then immediately sacrificing it will trigger the Sage twice that turn. That might be enough to complete all sagas you have, since they already enter with 1 lore counter and have 3 chapters. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits, my favorite ramp trifecta, are already good on their own, but help with proliferating if you control the Sage. If you played a land and then cast this, that might be enough to complete all your sagas. Last but not least is Staff of Completion. One of its modes is paying 3 life and tapping to proliferate, at instant speed no less. However, that's not all. We can use its first ability to sacrifice something stolen, or one of our enchantments if we want to trigger any death effects. For 2 life and tapping, it serves as a mana rock, while 4 life and tapping draws us a card. This artifact is amazing here because all of its modes are useful. Another reason we want to speedrun sagas is thanks to cards like Historian's Boon. Calyx isn't the only one that triggers on enchantments entering the battlefield. This enchantment creates 1/1 soldier tokens when a non-token enchantment enters the battlefield. So this will care about us blinking enchantment creatures en masse. Not only that, but whenever we complete a saga, we create a 4/4 angel token with flying and vigilance. This card is absolutely busted here, giving us a Serra Angel each time we finish a saga. However, Calyx and Historian's Boons are obviously not the only cards that care about us casting enchantments and having enchantments enter the battlefield. We're in Enchantress colors after all. Thus, the deck is running Enchantress's Presence, Argothian Enchantress, Mesa Enchantress, Verduran Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, and Sithith Harvest Hand. Each of these trigger whenever we cast an enchantment. Having multiples of these in play provide absolute insane value since the deck is 26% enchantments. However, these only trigger on cast, and the Sagas Exiling to Transform are not being cast. But for that, we have Eidolon of Blossoms and Setessan Champion, the absolute all-stars of this deck. These do trigger whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. So each time we have those double-faced sagas go through those revolving doors we saw earlier, we'll be drawing a ton of cards. If that weren't enough, Setessan Champion also gets a +1/+1 counter whenever it triggers. So besides card advantage, we're also getting an insane beater. Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water are included because of how many cards we start drawing thanks to these Enchantress effects. Not only that, but they also serve as mana rocks, with the first 2 helping us activate Eldrazi Displacer. The only other mana rock, Soul Ring, also helps activate Eldrazi Displacer, apart from being ubiquitous of course. Besides these Enchantress effects, the deck's also running Calyx Destiny's Hand. The only thing I dislike about this card is that it's not an enchantment planeswalker, same with Karn not being an artifact planeswalker, but that's a rant for another day. In any case, his positive planeswalker ability has us filter through the top 4 cards for an enchantment, bottom decking whatever we don't put into our hand. His -3 turns any enchantment we control into a prison type effect. While I don't use this ability much, having interaction on a planeswalker is always good. His ultimate reanimates all enchantments in our graveyard, which is great to have. Massive enchantment removal is not that common in Commander, but it does happen more often than not, so it's best to be prepared. So much so that Brilliant Restoration and Resurgent Belief are naturally included in the deck. The first one is quite costly to cast, but it's not like we'd be casting this in the early game anyways. With Resurgent Belief we'd have to wait a couple of turns, but that's fine since this is a mid-range deck anyways. That being said, you could always run Replenish if you wanted to. If you do, I suggest the gold bordered version of it since it costs about 1/3 of the original card. Replenish is amazing if you have it though, but not entirely necessary since you can get cheaper alternatives. Crystal Chimes and Elixir of Immortality also help recover, but they don't go directly to play. Getting them to your hand is still amazing though, since casting them will trigger the Enchantress effects that care about cast triggers. Plus, when they enter from the stack, they'll still trigger the other effects. The Elixir is just good to have since we have the potential of drawing a lot of cards, so this helps us recover in a more roundabout way. Hall of Healy's Generosity is another recovery effect on a land, which is amazing since it doesn't take up a slot on the deck. And it taps for colorless, which is good for Eldrazi Displacer. The enchantment does go on the top of our library, but we can always activate this in response to drawing a card, so it's no biggie. Also, the deck is running Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth and Yamavanya Cradle of Growth for mana fixing, so we're not getting Cutter's Clued anytime soon. So the handful of colorless sources for Eldrazi Displacer are good enough. Plus, turning all of our planes into triomes is never a bad thing. As for how enchantments would enter the graveyard, keep in mind that creatures are the most susceptible card type in the game. If someone wiped the board while all of our sagas were transformed, they're going to be in the graveyard. While we can recover from that later, keep in mind that Narci will only trigger if we sacrificed that enchantment, not if it died. But for that we have Faith Healer, a free instant speed way of sacrificing enchantments. Not only is sacrificing an enchantment in response to it dying amazing with this, but we can also do it on command if we needed to draw cards with our commander. So we can use this and recover effects if we don't have any blink effects yet. For example, Aspect of Mongoose and Rancor are in the deck. These R's are already amazing on their own, but even more so here. We can sacrifice these to Faith Healer to draw cards with our commander, and then these auras go back to our hand, in order to be cast again to trigger all of our Enchantress effects. Even if the creature died and the aura went to the graveyard as a state-based action, we still get it back into our hand. So good. Keep in mind that this situation in particular is different from Sagas. Auras going to the graveyard as a state-based action will not trigger our commander, only Sagas getting to their final ability if it doesn't transform. However, the best enchantments for sacrificing are Seal of Cleansing, Seal of Primordium, and Seal of Doom. These have a built-in sacrifice cost that can be done for no mana, no tapping, and an instant speed. They're also good because they're interactive effects, so not only do we get rid of something, but we draw a card off of our commander. And if we're recurring them with Hall of Healer's Generosity, we can use them time and time again. In fact, we can respond to Narci's trigger by activating Hall of Healer's Generosity. That way, the card we draw from her ability is the seal we sacrificed. Mastery of the stack provides for some pro-gamer moves. Let's see this in greater detail. Let's say we have Hall of Healer's Generosity, Narci, and Seal of Doom in play. We sacrifice Seal of Doom, putting its effect on the stack, while it also triggers Narci. In response to Narci's trigger, we will activate Hall of Healer's Generosity, putting Seal of Doom back onto our library. Narci triggers, drawing us the card, which is the Seal of Doom we top deck with the land. With all these abilities now resolved, Seal of Doom's effect resolves, destroying target non-black creature. You can easily do this each turn, and not even lock yourself out of drawing cards either. So good. Going back to self-sacrificing enchantments, Invasion of Gobakan, while a battle, is useful here for the same reason. It provides disruption when it enters the battlefield for only 2 mana. Then with only 3 counters, it's very easy to transform, which is what we want since it becomes Light Shield Array. This is yet another enchantment with a no mana instant speed self-sacrifice cost. When we do, our creatures gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Yet while in play, it's still good. It gives a +1/+1 counter to each creature that attacked that turn. That being said, Heroic Intervention is also in the deck. Not all cards in the deck have to be synergistic, so sometimes you just need to keep 1 and green open to protect your board. Another card that benefits from Narci's triggers is Wound Reflection. Recall that completing a saga will have Narci drain the table for X life. This just helps speed up the process by doubling the life our opponents lost at the end of the turn. Granted, you could also go for a more instantaneous route with Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood, but I've played this combo so many times in my early years of playing Commander that it no longer allures me. That being said, you could definitely include them if you wanted to, in order to end the game much faster. Or you can keep only one of either if you don't want to combo off, since both work well with Narci. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 shock lands, all 3 snow duels, all 3 slow duels, Ndatha Triome, Murmuring Bosk, Reflecting Pool, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic land, since you always need at least some basics in your decks. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Narci Fable Singer. While the Enduring Enchantments precon is amazing and its face commander Anakthea is great, I like Narci much more. Sasaki is a great commander for Sagas, but she has 1 less color than Narci and works really well as one of the 99 here. Granted, Atraxas Praetor's Voice is a better commander for this archetype since she has access to blue too, as well as proliferating at the end of your turn. But Atraxa is a kill-on-sight commander and she tends to make you the arch-enemy. Now Narci is a really nice happy medium between the two. Or you could just go all-color Sagas with Tom Bombadil, which if you do, you can find a deck tech for him in my channel. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check the links down in the description too. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.